Hi there, hope you're well. In this video, I'm going to take a quick look at table saws versus track saws for narrow rips. Yes, I know there's a few old chestnuts that come up time and time again on the YouTube circuit. I've done a couple of them myself in painting MDF and concealed hinges. I try and dress those up a little bit to make them a little bit different. And I'm going to get into the track saw and table saw thing this time around simply because it's particularly relevant to what I'm doing. I've been getting on with my router bench rebuild this week. It's taken a little bit longer than I'd expected it to because that's how it goes sometimes. But while I was building the router bench, it really struck me as one of the perfect examples of why I would choose a track saw over a table saw for my particular circumstances. Now, this isn't going to be one of those videos where I tell you which one you should buy because that's entirely up to you. It's just me explaining how I got to where I am. Now, judging by the comments that I get, whilst I do have a number of track saws, some people seem to think that I'm kind of a track saw fanatic and I hate table saws. That's not true. I have a table saw, technically speaking. I have a cabinet saw. It's a Swiss model made by Lutz, and the innards of it are attached to the cabinet, not to the table. That's what the difference is. I'm going to call them table saws just for the sakes of this video, because you know what I mean. A table saw relies on two things for its excellence. Generally speaking, you need a good table and a good fence. This fairly elderly Swiss model has neither of those things. The table is particularly curious, and then it's got this little sort of slidey type thing, so it's not quite a proper sliding table because it doesn't have the range of movement, and it's very restricting because it means you can't have a zero clearance insert around the blade. I didn't realise those things when I bought it, and this is probably one of my worst purchases. In fact, I could probably do a video about my 5 worst purchases. Let me know in the comments down below if that's something that you'd like to see. But I do have a table saw. I bought it for one very specific thing, and it failed spectacularly at that. I won't get into too many details on this, but long story short, it's a 12-inch cabinet saw that has the cutting depth of barely a 10-inch saw. It'll barely do 3 inches, 70 mil depth of cut, which is not much more than the little 8-inch saw that I had before. Anyway, I'm not fanatical about track saws. I don't hate table saws, but for my circumstances and for what I'm doing, a track saw is generally a better thing for me. So one of the problems that I have in this particular workshop is simply lack of space. Although I have 2 rooms, the main workshop room here is about 150 square feet, 19 feet or so long, 8'6" wide, so about 2.5 meters wide by just over 5. So not very big at all. The problem that I have with table saws is if you get to any size of workpiece that's significantly bigger than the table, you've got to have a lot of space for in-feed and out-feed. Now, I said before, I'm sort of part way through my router bench build, and if you saw the previous video where I tore the old one down, you'll notice that I said that the router itself was situated almost exactly in the center of the workshop length. That means that I could get a full 8-foot length of whatever into it and out of it without too many problems. I would have to have the table saw absolutely in the middle of the workshop, which would be around about here, in order to do that. Now, that's not really going to happen because it's too big and heavy to move around, and putting it on a mobile base isn't really an option because the floor just isn't good enough for that. So it leaves me with a bit of a dilemma. I do like a table saw for narrow rips and cutting wedges. I think I talked about that in previous videos, and when I did my tricky track saw cuts, I showed how I've got around some of those things. But it was building the router bench that really gave me the perfect opportunity to explain why I prefer a track saw over a table saw. So the router bench is coming along. It's taken a little bit longer than I had planned, but I've made the basic sort of base of it in a torsion box style. If you don't know what that is, a torsion box is a little bit like joists in a house with noggins between them. The joists sit on edge, and then you get, in a house, you get floorboards that go on top of that. In a torsion box bench build like this, you have strips of wood, strips of MDF ideally, because it's flat and stable, which are all cut to the same height, and then with noggins between them to keep them nice and steady. And then you, instead of having floorboards, you literally glue and screw or glue and nail a top and base to it, and that whole sandwich keeps the whole thing super flat and steady. Of course, you know, like any piece of wood, it's a bit bendy when it's sort of like that, but if you put it on edge, it becomes much stiffer, much straighter, and it's that stiffness, that straightness that we value more than anything in a bench build like this. Of course, that presents a couple of problems, because you've got to cut very precise and very consistent strips of timber off a sheet. And in my case, I was reusing some MDF that I had already. It was 1600 long by 1200 high, so 6 foot by 4 foot, more or less. The idea of feeding something that size through a table saw is challenging, to say the least, especially to rip narrow strips off it. Unless you've got a side table, then it's you know, a difficult thing to do. And even ripping some of it down to get the base, that would be 700 by 1500. That would be quite a challenge, because even with the side extension on my table saw here, it only brings the maximum cut width to 600 mil. So, you know, it's not ideal. And you've then got the added problem, of course, of then needing to cross-cut that 1600 wide board down to 1400, which is what the finished size is. Again, that's quite hard to do on a table saw without a lot of space around it and without some kind of support for the material. The other material that I was reusing as well was some old Sapele veneered board. I was cutting this up to use for the noggins, not because I wanted to be fancy, just because it was all I had. And all I had of this was just a couple of half sheet sizes but full length boards, and these are 8 foot boards. So again, getting a narrow rip with space to get it in and out in this particular workshop doesn't leave much space at all for the saw itself. In fact, I literally don't think I could get the saw into that space. Couple of inches short. So compare that, for example, with just plonking a couple of scraps of 6mm MDF, sacrificial MDF, down onto the benches and just ripping that with the Tracksaw. Far and away an easier option for me. Now, one of the comments that I do get fairly routinely about Tracksaws versus table saws is that people seem to think that Tracksaws are fine for roughly dimensioning my timber, but I take it to the table saw to get it cut accurately, as if only a table saw can make accurate cuts. I find this a bit strange, really, because the Tracksaw is one of the easier things to get an accurate cut with. You get your brand new guardrail fresh out of the box, you trim that splitter guard back so it's tuned into your saw and your blade, and then whenever you put your guardrail down against your pencil mark, then that's where your cut line is going to be. Personally, I prefer not to use pencil marks for the narrow rips that I was doing today. I just use a simple sliding square against the splitter guard and use a little waist side jigs to offset the blade kerf as well. Again, these are available in a variety of different thicknesses for different blades. That's how I managed to get 6-7 complete rips out of MDF and plywood, absolutely consistent to 82mm wide, using a sliding square and some wayside jigs. Now, just to be clear, I'm not trying to convince you to give up your table saw and go into 100% Tracksaw woodworking. That's your business. It's my business what I choose to use, and it's your business what you choose to use. And make no mistake, if I didn't have this honking great wall here between the two rooms that I have, if this was one open space, I would absolutely have a cast iron cabinet saw in the middle there with a big assembly table, outfeed table behind it, as you've seen so many on so many YouTube channels. But that's not what I have, so I cut my cloth to match my suit, or whatever the expression is. I have a table saw, don't like it very much, doesn't work very well for my circumstances. A track saw combined with, it has to be said, the MFT, the multifunction table, really does work well for me. And if that works well for you as well, then that's fantastic. If a table saw works well for you, if you've got the space for it, if you're just working on smaller projects where the size of the infeed and outfeed doesn't matter that much, or if you've got space to support the workpiece as it's going through for crosscuts, then fantastic. Have it and enjoy it, just as I'll enjoy my stuff too. I'm going to leave it there for this one though. Thank you ever so much for taking a look. Just a quicker one. Thanks as always to my amazing Patreon supporters and YouTube members whose continued support really does help me to keep the lights on here. You guys are in for a bumper week in the workshop vlog this weekend, where I'm going to go through all the mistakes I've made on my router bench, of which there are many. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, come along and join in. But that's it for this one. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, take care.